pause in the middle. I'll pause in the middle if you have any questions, and you'll read the questions.
Yeah. I'll keep you posted if there's any questions coming about. So don't worry. Okay.
Sure. Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the 5th session of the Cambium College, and going into the regards with the Wi-Fi network. Today I have Chayton with us, one of our Wi-Fi specialists. So without further ado, Chayton, I pass it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Depending on your time zone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thanks for joining on this session of Cambium University. Today we're going to talk about Wi-Fi networks, and as a topic, this subject can stretch into hours and days. What we want to do here is give you a quick overview, a little bit of the technology, a little bit of the of how it evolved. Where did it start from, and where is it now? And then we also want to take you a little bit from technology to the business side of Wi-Fi, kind of show you how Wi-Fi has changed from being Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi networks. Along the way, we'll keep this informal. You can pause and ask us questions, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. And hopefully, we'll all have a bit of fun learning a little bit more about Wi-Fi. And of course, in a subject like this, there's always so much more to learn. So we'll come back later on with another edition with a deeper dive into Wi-Fi. So with that said, so what is Wi-Fi and where did it all start from? We hear this term often. Most of us have a Wi-Fi router at home. So really, if you look at it, Wi-Fi is a marketing term that was invented by the Wi-Fi Alliance. Some people say it stands for wireless fidelity, although there is not much evidence that that's what it really means. But whatever and however it started, it's really gained a lot of traction in the last so many years that today, what is called Wi-Fi, people have forgotten what it really meant. It really was called as WLAN, or wireless LAN, or wireless local area network. So technologists still refer to this as WLAN networks, while everybody else around the world just calls it as a Wi-Fi network. Wi-Fi itself is a protocol. What that means is really it's a language or an agreed upon method of communication between two computers. And the W in Wi-Fi stands for wireless. So this is a wireless way in which two of these computers communicate. And if you recall the first introduction that Alex provided on computer networks, in terms of, he referred to something called the OSI model, which is the 7 layers in which the computers communicate. Wi-Fi itself happens at layer 1 and layer 2. And above that is layer 3, which is the IP layer. So a lot of what we talk about as Wi-Fi really is the magic that's happening in the layer 1 and layer 2 of the OSI protocol. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about how that magic actually happens. More than magic, it's really managed chaos that's happening at those layers as these devices transmit to each other. Well, as a technology, Wi-Fi works over wireless, and it's been defined to work across a couple of different spectrums: 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 60 gigahertz. Most of the common communication that you see happens in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrum, but now there is a lot of new devices coming up that work on 60 gigahertz. That really hasn't penetrated the consumer segment yet. The 60 gigahertz is still in more of a long distance wireless communication. So when we talk about spectrum, this is the most important thing about any wireless communication. At the end of the day, the quality of the spectrum, the natural characteristic of the spectrum can make or break your communication. So if you think of 2.5 gigahertz spectrum or 2.4 gigahertz, this is the most common spectrum in which Wi-Fi operates. It's also the same spectrum that's used by your baby monitors, microwave ovens, wireless video cameras. Literally anybody can use that spectrum. It's a piece of spectrum that's in most countries is designated as free for use. So that means that anybody who wants to create wireless devices can use that spectrum. And other than adhering to the rules of how much power to transmit, there really aren't a whole lot of rules. So it's really a free-for-all spectrum. It also means that it makes it very easy for people to communicate with each other, but it also means that devices step on each other's toes all the time in the 2.4 gigahertz. So if the next time you see your microwave oven cooking or melting your chocolate, just know that that's the same frequency that's used in your Wi-Fi router, except it's used at a much, much lower power that it can't really cook your skin. But it also means that when you have a Wi-Fi router and a microwave oven operating next to each other, you're going to hear some interference, you're going to see some buffering in your video if you've been watching video, and all of that is because they all share the same spectrum. Because it's such a noisy medium, you'll see that on 2.4 gigahertz, the speed is much lower. Lately, the FCC opened up another band of spectrum called the 5 gigahertz spectrum. That one is much cleaner. There are not as many devices on that spectrum. And it comes with a channel or a lane allocation scheme that is much more cleaner and much more flexible. So if you think of spectrum as a piece of land in which you can traverse, channels are lanes. So think of channels as the lanes on your highway, spectrum as the road on which you can drive. On 5 gigahertz, you have much cleaner lanes. The lanes are a little bit are the same as the individual lanes are the same on each. However, there are many more lanes on 5 gigahertz compared to a 2.4 gigahertz. With 5 gigahertz, there's also technology that allows you to bond these lanes or join these lanes together. And one of the properties of wireless propagation is when you have a bigger lane or a fatter lane, you can pack more bits through that lane, which means that you can transmit more information the bigger your channel is or the bigger your lane is. And so one of the advantages of 5 gigahertz is because it's clean, it's relatively clean, there's not so much interference, and you can take these channels and join them together. Your 5 gigahertz capable devices can transmit at a much higher speed. So today, if you go out one of your and buy your favorite router or your iPhone or your Samsung Galaxy phone, they're all capable of working on 5 gigahertz, which means that you now are able to see YouTube transmissions and other video transmissions while you're still able to make a call on WhatsApp or on other voice over IP services. So all of that is a property of the channel. Now, one of the interesting things about these two channels is the 2.4 gigahertz channel actually penetrates certain structures like trees or can bend around corners, while the 5 gigahertz gets easily stopped as it propagates through the air. That's the property of the channel. What that means is your 2.4 gigahertz, which has a lower speed, actually goes a higher distance. So for example, if you have a router in your basement, you might actually receive the signal on 2.4 gigahertz even 2 stories up. On 5 gigahertz, it can't travel as much, which means that its signal fades away or drops away much faster. Now, that can be seen as a disadvantage, but it actually is put to good use in high-density Wi-Fi networks. So for example, if you have an office space and you want to pack a lot more number of people on your Wi-Fi routers, you can locate 2 5 gigahertz routers quite close to each other and have them reuse the frequency space because the 5 gigahertz signal does not travel as far. So that means you can reuse the signal in space much more frequently. So that's a very critical property of 5 gigahertz that's often used in modern Wi-Fi networks. So that's an example of putting something that might seem as a disadvantage on the surface to good use. So stepping back, if you think about how it all began, sometime in the late 90s, the first generation of Wi-Fi routers came online, and these were capable of a top speed of 2 megabits per second. At that time, mostly they could be used for reading email, maybe browsing some websites that weren't too intensive on graphics, but that's about it. And these are speeds at the lowest level of computer communication. So the actual usable speeds were often much, much lower than 2 megabits per second. Fast forward from 1997 through now, in the last 20 years, Wi-Fi has made tremendous advances. We've gone from that first generation 2 megabits per second to now what is called the fifth generation technology to over 1 gigabit per second. That's over 1 billion bits per second packed into your Wi-Fi transmission. So what that means now is where one person could read an email or download a website, today everybody is at home watching Netflix on their individual phones, laptops, and all of that is happening while under the layer these Wi-Fi routers are communicating at much, much higher speed. So what you have today is called the 11AC technology. AC doesn't really stand for anything other than the letters that the standards body uses. And they basically ran out of single-digit letters. So they started packing 2 additional letters for each of the standards. And so today we are at 11AC. There is 802.11ad, which is used in 60 gigahertz technology. And then in the next 1 year or so, we're going to see 11AX, which is going to be the next generation of high-speed Wi-Fi technology. So if you think of its humble beginnings, the protocol underneath really hasn't changed in its fundamental nature. The efficiency of the chipsets have changed. The power of the processing units on our phones, on our laptops have changed, but the fundamental technology really hasn't changed. And if there's one thing you can remember or take away from how Wi-Fi works, it's really how people talk in a party room. So some people call this the cocktail party protocol. What that does is, in Wi-Fi, anybody can transmit at just about any time. So just like in a party room, when two people talk to each other at the same time, we back off or we stop, we pause, and then one of us communicates, the other listens, and then we talk again. And that's exactly how Wi-Fi routers work. So this is called, in the technical language, as listen before talk. It means that you try to hear how the spectrum is before you communicate. And when you do communicate, if you do detect some noise, the computer backs off and waits for a certain random amount of time before it talks. So in the most user-friendly sense, this is called carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance, or CSMA-CA or CD. So for the rest of us who can't make much of these acronyms, it's simply called as listen before talk protocol. One of the things with Wi-Fi is, and you may have seen this in your home routers where you give your Wi-Fi signal a name. Those signals are called as beacons or SSIDs or service set identifiers. A single physical Wi-Fi router can have multiple SSIDs or service set identifiers or beacons. These are just virtual ways of creating multiple networks. Underneath all of that is really one physical router, but it can make you feel as if you're connected to multiple different wireless networks. And so by using this technology, people have now extended Wi-Fi from homes to offices to schools to public Wi-Fi. And we'll go through some examples of those a little further down here. Now, what I didn't do here is cover a lot of the exact nature of the Wi-Fi protocol. It's best understood with some animations. I'd urge you to check out, Google for Wi-Fi, how does Wi-Fi work, or how Wi-Fi works on YouTube, and you'll see lots of animations on how Wi-Fi works. But underneath all of that is basically a broadcast protocol that broadcasts once. If it makes it great, if it doesn't, it backs off and retransmits. So when you're watching that Netflix video, and those action scenes over Wi-Fi, there might be millions of frames that are getting transmitted and retransmitted over and over again until that actual bit makes it to you and is decoded on your computer and is shown as an image on your computer. And so that's fundamentally how Wi-Fi works. No matter how simple the Wi-Fi network is, or how complex the Wi-Fi network is.
Shane, we did have a question that came in here. Does Wi-Fi care about UDP or TCP?
Wi-Fi in its fundamental sense does not care about UDP or TCP. UDP and TCP are protocols on top of the Wi-Fi layer. So when you have a UDP, which is a layer 4 protocol, it's built over IP, and that IP packet goes over Wi-Fi. For example, that same UDP or TCP frame can go over a wired Ethernet, and it wouldn't know the difference whether it went over wireless or wired medium. So those things happen at what is called as layer 4 of the OSI communication layer, whereas Wi-Fi happens at layer 1 and 2. It's sort of like an analogy might be, if imagine you're sitting in a nice cocooned chair and you're being transported sometimes by train and sometimes by plane or sometimes by a ship. And if the cocoon in which you're being transported is well insulated, you wouldn't know the difference of how you're actually making it. Now, having said all that, people do tune those parameters depending on whether they happen to know if it's Wi-Fi or wired. But otherwise, the protocols themselves fundamentally don't know or shouldn't care whether the underlying protocol is wireless or wired. That's a good question. Okay. Moving on. So if you think of Wi-Fi, that's exactly how individual Wi-Fi routers work. So where do we see Wi-Fi today? Well, so this is the transition point from technology to the business side of Wi-Fi. If you look at Wi-Fi, we see it really in 3 fundamental places today. One is in the home, where most of us are familiar with our Wi-Fi router. Sometimes these are long forgotten little boxes that are sitting up there in a shelf or behind some books. And sometimes they are the latest technology. Very often they are consumer owned. So for example, many of us buy them on Amazon or other places. Or sometimes our ISP installs these Wi-Fi routers for us. But they're still standalone and usually unmanaged. The other kind of Wi-Fi we see is often in schools, hotels, office spaces. These are often managed and coordinated Wi-Fi installations. So for example, in a school classroom, there might be 1 or even 2 access points, depending on how big the classroom is, how many people are in the classroom, what kind of applications are run over that Wi-Fi network. These are often managed by the local IT or sometimes an ISP that comes in and does this for you. And usually the requirements are much more stringent around security, capacity, throughput, all of those things. And so that's called as enterprise Wi-Fi. Another kind of hybrid Wi-Fi has become fairly popular in the last couple of years. And these are Wi-Fi that you see that serves not only the employees of an enterprise, but also the public that walks in and out of that enterprise. For example, in cafes, airports, along Main Street, for example, in many towns, there's public Wi-Fi on Main Street. For example, if you go to San Francisco or San Jose, you'll see public Wi-Fi in the downtown areas run by the city of San Francisco or the city of San Jose. And so these are becoming popular as well. And it really speaks to the maturity of Wi-Fi. And in some sense, Wi-Fi has literally gone from left to right, as it shows in the slide. Started with homes, started with schools and campuses, moved on to offices, and now public Wi-Fi. Along the way, one of the things that Wi-Fi has had to continually deal with, and in some places they do well with it, and some places they don't, is interference. So here's the picture on the right, where you think, and you'll see this very often in apartment complexes or multi-dwelling units, where everybody buys their own individual routers. The routers don't talk to each other or communicate with each other, and they're all blasting away to interfering with each other's signals. So every time one router hears another router in the adjacent house, it backs off, waits for some time, and retransmits. So what that means is people often associate Wi-Fi with poor performance, and they're often complaining about their Wi-Fi, and it's really not just their Wi-Fi. It's happening because of their neighbor's Wi-Fi, and the 2 Wi-Fi devices don't talk to each other. So this is what is called as unmanaged Wi-Fi. So these are all just routers, everybody just screaming as much as they can on top of their lungs, no real coordination among the Wi-Fi. The result, there is much slower speed and buffering. So this is something that public Wi-Fi networks or enterprise Wi-Fi networks have managed to substantially overcome. So for example, if you think of the Wi-Fi in your school campus, you've got lots and lots of access points. Their ultimate goal is to take you to your destination either within the school enterprise network or to an outside enterprise network. And one of the key differences between that unmanaged picture of individual standalone routers and this is that there is a central controller. In all of these installations, there's often a central entity that's coordinating which channel a Wi-Fi can use, how much transmit power a Wi-Fi can give, and that coordinated Wi-Fi is called a Wi-Fi network. More accurately, it's called a managed Wi-Fi network. And there's usually a trained IT personnel or an ISP that's taking care of it. At its most fundamental, this is how the school Wi-Fi works, this is how hotel Wi-Fi works, this is how public Wi-Fi works. And that's the key difference between the Wi-Fi routers in our houses and the Wi-Fi routers in public areas. So what exactly do they manage? Well, one of the first things they manage is security. We didn't really talk a whole lot of security about Wi-Fi at this point. So this might be a good point to give a little bit of Wi-Fi security overview. Given that Wi-Fi is a broadcast medium, what we mean by that is if I'm a Wi-Fi router and I broadcast, everybody can hear you. So fundamentally, there is no security at the lowest level. So security is built on top of that with encryption of the signal. The other way, so you'll see, especially in the past, there used to be a lot of Wi-Fi hacking. There still is a lot of Wi-Fi hacking because there are lots of what are called as open SSIDs or unsecured SSIDs out there. So one of the things that happens with good school and hotel installations is they manage security. The other thing they do is they control the transmit power. So for example, the AP on the top cannot interfere with the AP on the bottom. So they make the cell radius, they manage the radius of transmission of the AP. They also manage the channel. So by having each AP pick up a unique channel or a unique lane, they make sure that the two APs don't necessarily interfere with each other. The other way enterprise networks are managed is by managing the client density. In other words, how many people can attach to an AP. There are special features on these APs where if too many people attach on one particular band, for example, 2.4 gigahertz band, the AP can nudge the client to move over to the 5 gigahertz band. Now that's a very important thing because that frees up a lot of capacity on 2.4 and improves the speed for the client on the 5 gigahertz. So all of these tricks can be played with the presence of a central controller. So that's the key difference, which is why in good Wi-Fi installations in airports or in hotels, we often don't realize that it's underneath all of that complexity. It's really the same protocol that's working in your home that's now being designed to work at a much larger scale. So here's an example of Wi-Fi in schools, for example. So today Wi-Fi is used indoors in classrooms, auditoriums, where the destination of the transmission is also controlled. For example, certain sites are banned in schools. All of those services are done by that entity called the controller. Wi-Fi also has something called the Wi-Fi mesh protocol. It's really a way in which Wi-Fi interlinks to each other and creates a mesh, often used in outdoor networks for easy and convenient access. And then we've also got products today that use the Wi-Fi protocol, but use it for point-to-point communication or much more narrow communication. And that's, for example, often used in communicating linking up one building to another building. So you can see how things have evolved, not only along the technology ladder, where we've gone from 2 megabits to over a gigabit in speed, but also in terms of how the network itself is being designed, how things are being put together, indoor and outdoor, controlled and uncontrolled networks all coming in together. And that controller there is the key to making everything coordinated and working fine. So here's an example, for example, in hotels. Here's one of our own installations in Bali, Indonesia, where we've got outdoor and indoor Wi-Fi. Again, the controller is the key here because it coordinates all of those channels. Wi-Fi itself has evolved to the point where you've got high capacity of people attaching to Wi-Fi networks. For example, at gaming shows, gaming contests. I could not have imagined 10 years back Wi-Fi would be the way in which people would connect to each other and play games, but that's where we are today. And from there, we've got Wi-Fi now pretty much at the top of the world. This here is an actual real photograph of an equipment sitting at the base camp of Mount Everest, connecting a lot of the climbers and the people who come there before they make their ascent to Mount Everest. That's at a height of over 17,000 feet. That's almost halfway up to the height at which your aircraft flies. And that, if you look at this picture, a very interesting thing is the equipment here now is so rugged that it can sit on top of a glacier. What you see as rocks here is actually a glacier, and the glacier is actually moving. So the Wi-Fi signal is still robust enough that it can function at that kind of altitude, supporting those kind of deployments. And one little factoid here is all of this had to be carried by mules over 3 days before they could get every wire, every power supply that works out there. So you can see that the humble Wi-Fi router in the home is made it all the way to the top, and the protocol still works. So hopefully that gave you guys a good overview of a little bit of the technology and a little bit of the evolution of the maturity of these networks. And I think in the next couple of years, you'll see much more interesting evolution of the Wi-Fi networks as they start to handle gigabits of speed. So with that, we'll draw this webinar to a close. If you have any questions, this would be a good time. If not, you can still reach out to us and email us if you have any questions, and we'd be happy to answer them on the forum.
Yes, Shane, so far we don't have any questions. So I want to thank you for joining. I want to thank everyone else for joining. If you have any questions or any concerns or any ideas, please feel free to post on our forum, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. Anywhere where we can see you guys and we can answer and connect with you, that'd be more than welcome. Oh, one more question here, Shane.
Sure.
Does it support standard Wi-Fi?
Does the EPMP support standard Wi-Fi? The EPMP, okay, the question refers to one of our product lines, the EPMP. EPMP itself uses standard Wi-Fi chipsets, but in its native form does not support standard Wi-Fi. It can, however, be made to work in standard Wi-Fi mode, where it can be used to interoperate with a third-party equipment.
Okay, fantastic. Another one we have here is, what's the difference between Wi-Fi at the 5 gig and some of your other wireless equipment at the 5 gig?
What's the difference and some of your other wireless equipment at 5 gig? So 5 gigahertz itself is an unlicensed frequency medium, so in which Wi-Fi is one of the technologies that can operate there. In addition to Wi-Fi, we've got our own in the case of Cambium, we've got our own wireless equipment that has its own Cambium proprietary protocol by which they communicate. For example, our PTP 650 or our PMP 450, these are point nodes. So both of these ends are Cambium equipped. So we're able to take the standard protocol, for example, or create our own protocol and communicate between those two. The government or technical bodies do not mandate which protocol you use. So you can use Wi-Fi or you can use your own proprietary protocol. We're able to use our own proprietary protocol because we control both ends of the nodes. for wireless point-to-point links. But we need to use standard protocol when we need to talk to devices like laptops and phones, because without a standard, there wouldn't be a way to communicate with each other.
Fantastic, Shane. Well, I believe those are, it says, how is the Mount Everest Wi-Fi picture that you have posted? How is it powered?
Very, very good question. So the power there comes from a solar panel that you don't see in the picture here. That solar panel is connected to a battery. It provides about 6 hours of battery-powered Wi-Fi. So it functions pretty well during the day, and at night there is limited Wi-Fi.
Okay. CSMA-CA allows single user access for an amount of time. How does Wi-Fi handle hundreds or even thousands of people in a public space? Or do network engineers need to consider capacity issues, needs in advance?
Very good question. So Wi-Fi itself handles the same whether you're one client or 100 clients. So for example, if you've got one client or 2 clients, both of those clients, or for example laptops, can transmit at the same time. They might sense each other and they back off. Now obviously, as more number of clients get into the network, they're still continuing to do this. So one of the things you'll see in Wi-Fi networks is, as the number of clients increases, the throughput or the speed will start to fall. Now, because of the nature of today's of good Wi-Fi equipment, in many cases, many vendors can handle 30 or 40 clients. In our case, for example, we handle about anywhere from 70 to 100 clients before we start to see that reduction in speed, or perceivably see the reduction in speed. So we're really taking advantage of faster processing capacity of the processor, the power of the chipsets. Now, on top of it, when you let's say you go from hundreds to thousands, then your second part of the question comes into play. Then network planners, what they do is they split the Wi-Fi network into multiple pieces. So for example, we talked about how 5 gigahertz cannot propagate too far. What they might do is they might plan these networks so that in the vicinity of any one router, only about 100 clients or less than 100 can attach. And then they place another router or access point, and then they'll have another 100 attached to that. So by creating this high density of Wi-Fi access points, they are now able to divide the population so that each one attaches to one of these routers. And on top of it, they're taking advantage of something that's a statistical phenomenon. When you put 100 people in a room, and you find that not all 100 typically use the Wi-Fi at the same time. And especially when you compare the speed of computer to the speed of humans, even if all of us were to use at the same time, statistically in terms of computer speed, we would be split out in time. So you often find that worst case, you find 20 or 30% of the people are actually hitting the medium at the exact same time. So by taking advantage of all of this with a little bit of network planning and capacity, by taking advantage of the higher power processing speeds that are available today in computers, we're able to pack a lot of people where previously, we could only pack like anywhere from 1 to 10 people.
Fantastic. What about if they're all streaming at the same time? Is that also a concern that you touched on?
Yes. So even though they're streaming at the same time, for example, another interesting property is there's often more downlink consumption than uplink consumption. So what we mean by downlink is when let's say, imagine a group of people sitting in a conference room or sitting in a cafe. Most of us are downloading data rather than uploading data. So for example, imagine that there are 10 people sitting in a cafe and 6 of them are watching a broadcast, a football game. Really, the Wi-Fi router isn't sending 10 copies of this. It's really putting all of them into a group and sending them one copy of the image, because it happens to know that that's the same data that they're using. So by playing some of these tricks, the in the case if you, for example, if people are watching the same event or hitting the same destination, the Wi-Fi router is able to optimize the transmission of data down to the clients. So even with streaming, it's the same thing that was explained earlier, except in the case of streaming, there's another factor that comes into play called latency. In other words, we notice even a slightest delay when bits are lost. We notice the buffering in our video stream. However, in the case of video, you can actually lose a couple of bits, and the human eye still can make out that that you actually lost a couple of bits. Getting the video in time is critical, but you can lose a couple of bits. In the case of voice, there is a certain minimum number of bits that you have to get in, but even there you can lose certain number of bits, but timing becomes even more essential in the case of voice. So whether it's streaming or voice, the Wi-Fi routers are taking advantage of some of the anomaly in our human eyes and ears, and at the same time we're taking advantage of the fastest speed in the chipsets, and that's how we've reached a point today where we're not able to see, where very often we run into good Wi-Fi networks more than we run into bad Wi-Fi networks. So I know we haven't, we've barely scratched the surface of this topic. So another thing that I'd like you all to do is give us feedback on which topics in Wi-Fi you'd like us to go deeper into. And maybe we can have another session of this university spending more time on one or two particular topics. So perhaps how network planning is done, or perhaps how CSMA CD works at a much more deeper level.
Fantastic, Shane. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining. Again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them on the forum, and we'll get back to you guys as soon as possible. But thank you for joining, and we'll see you guys at the next recording.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.